Hello, everyone. This is Raphael.
This is Loryn.
We're the Pacheco siblings, and welcome to the Hypercube podcast, a talk show in which two siblings converse about anything and everything. Hey again.
Sup?
So, every once in a while, I think about that time that person got put in the hospital for trying to psychically attack David Lynch.
Oh wait, hold on, what?
Do you ever hear that story?
No.
No, that's a classic. So yeah, there was this, I think it was from a long time ago. It's screenshotted for the internet that just floats around and makes the rounds every once in a while. And every time I think about it, I laugh. But there was this 4chan poster a while ago who was trying to make David Lynch sick by thinking negative thoughts about him.
Uh-huh.
And he ended up having a seizure in the process and went to the hospital.
Okay, I think I vaguely remember that. That vaguely tickles a memory.
Yeah. But I mean, it seems, it checks out when you think about it, because it's like, why would you try to psychically attack David Lynch?
Well, what was that other one that you were talking about where it's just I don't remember who this person was, but it was like a filmmaker of some kind. It's like, as soon as you watch these films, you are inviting a psychic
you're talking
duel
about
with him.
You're talking about, that was a Trevor Henderson tweet I was quoting to you, where Trevor Henderson, I forgot which director it was, but he's a really, really bad film director. Yeah. Really bad.
Really bad.
I showed you the trailers for a couple of his films. His stuff
it's mind-boggling.
Absolutely horrid. But it's he was saying you get watching his films actually gives him permission to duel with you on the astral plane.
That's what it is. Yeah.
So you got to be safe in your movie selection process.
Yeah. I feel like if you were trying to psychically attack David Lynch, I feel like having an aneurysm is the only possible outcome.
Yeah, right. I mean, there are some people who are responding to this saying that's one of the first rules of in Wiccan culture is, don't screw with David Lynch. And he disregarded one of the first rules.
Yeah.
So
it's funny, that's actually a really deep cut pagan joke.
Is it?
Yeah, one of the first rules in Wiccan is it's because it's the idea of you receive what you put out. So one of the first rules is basically don't put out negative energy. So if you turn that around, it's the first rule is don't attack David Lynch.
Yeah. David Lynch fascinates me, though. I don't know if I've talked about this on the podcast, but David Lynch is a character. Mm-hmm. And I've been showing you lately some of how much of a character he is, because he's a great YouTube channel.
He's great. Yeah.
He's got a great YouTube channel where he does his weather reports and his numbers of the day and all sorts of other little side projects. And I only recently discovered it.
I haven't seen numbers of the day.
Yeah, that one's pretty great. He just picks a number out of a jar.
That's awesome.
And yeah, so it's really fascinating. There's something about David Lynch that is simultaneously really wholesome, but also down to earth. Yeah. He's just a guy who does stuff.
Well, there are a select group of people that I use this phrase for that I think David Lynch perfectly embodies. Because there are a select group of human individuals who get it, right? Mm-hmm. Whatever it is, they get it. David Lynch gets it.
Oh, yeah. David Lynch totally gets it. He's fascinating. And he's not, the thing about him is that he's not at all the person you would expect behind his films in a lot of ways. A lot of people, and you see this, you watch a lot of interviews with him, and a lot of people have a lot of presuppositions about what he's supposed to be like. Yeah. And they'll come out and be like, after just watching one of his films, it's just what's wrong with you? You're some sick, twisted weirdo. But you listen to him talk, and he's just super folksy and really soft spoken and just a real calm, cheerful guy. It's fascinating, but it's the folksiness that kind of gets me, though, right? You would think he's some by his work that he's this. I mean, he is a highbrow artist type, but there's a certain stereotype you associate with where that kind of person comes from culturally, and what kind of upbringing or whatever they had. But it's just nah, he's just some
some bloke,
average, folksy guy from Montana, and he's just super polite, and he's just pleased to meet you. Pleased as punch, really.
Yeah, there's, especially when it comes to directors, like film directors, because there's a kind of mythology around film directing. For some reason, people think film directors are like this next level artists or whatever, but like in art in general, people have trouble differentiating the work that is created and the artist, right? So it's like, there's a lot of people who, like, I mean, especially when you have a lot of the kind of vocabulary and like the way that we talk about art, where it's like, you create art from like a place of understanding, or it's like you write what you know, right? It's like, oh, okay, so people who write psychopathic horror flicks are all psychopathic horror, or all psychopathic like mass murderers, obviously, every single one of them. That's not how that works. People don't create art, like people don't put to film the thing that they do in their personal life. That's not how that works.
Yeah.
That's not what it means. Like, it sounds like that's what it means if you don't understand what it's like to create, but there's a separation between the work that is created and the artist, right? The work comes from a place within the artist, not literally. Like, it's not meant to be taken like as a literal interpretation of this is how I exist.
Yeah. Exactly. Well, and that's, I think there's a confusion, especially if you're not a creator yourself, between, I guess, content and theme. You know what I mean? Because that's what we're talking about when we talk about write what you know. And I think there are limitations to that phrase. I don't support it entirely. That I don't think that's completely aphoristic and true in all circumstances, that you should write what you know. The generous interpretation that I think is most broadly applicable is talking about theme rather than content. It's not necessarily saying write the subjects you know, although you probably should do that sometimes, because you could probably do it very well and better than most.
Yeah, you bang it out.
But that's a safe thing for you to fall back on. But it's not necessarily talking about writing the subjects you know, but rather writing the themes you know, writing what your experience is, because story can be allegory, and story can be a non-literal representation of what you know, right? Like, you can not know, I don't know, the crime world, but you can understand organizational, like, business dynamics or family dynamics, and then apply those, right? And then you get The Godfather. So that's it's not to assume that, well, actually, I don't know, but if the writer, has particular life experience in that area, but it's just about what it represents thematically, what it represents emotionally, and it's about experiences, not content.
Exactly. Especially when it comes to theme, there's a lot of confusion about like what even story is. Like, especially when it comes to just like talking to lay people about film or any kind of media, like any kind of narrative media in general, like even books sometimes, where it's like, oh, like, what's this movie about? And they'll proceed to tell you the plot, right?
Right, yeah.
It's like, no, like, what is this? What is it about? Is it about family? Is it about, families are really easy one. A lot of them is often it's about family.
My family.
But my family,
where's Vin Diesel?
One last ride. But yeah, it's like, what is it about? Not what are you showing me, but what is it about? Like, what am I supposed to feel? What am I supposed to come away having learned, or that kind of stuff, right? That's the story. That's the theme. Those are the elements of the film that are transcendent beyond its plot. That's the part that you need to know and understand in your bones as a storyteller, is your themes, your stories. And, depending on who you ask, there are only a certain number of stories. And if that's the case, then that would mean like everybody made the exact same film, like the exact same, novels. If there's only like 5 stories or one story, then why do we have so many books? Because it's the plot that changes. It's just new interpretations of the same themes, of the same stories. And that's where being an artist comes in. It's like, being an artist is like, okay, I understand this theme. Now I'm going to, do storytelling and create a plot out of thin air. Could be literally anything to embody this theme.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a part of a larger discussion about story versus plot, which we have to have on the podcast at some point. I think that might be an entire episode that we could do
have to be
on story versus plot, because that's a huge point and a very ephemeral point that is argued over ad nauseum. But I think we have very hard stances on it, and I think I know my definitions. And it's very interesting, because I think it is the thing that pretty much most artists understand at the very least intuitively, but oftentimes aren't able to explain well to people who aren't artists, because I've heard I remember Martin Scorsese once was asked about this, and, even he struggled to find a concise answer. But, this is Martin Scorsese we're talking about. We know he understands it. It's just that not everybody's able to articulate it. But I think I've gotten this because it's something we think about a lot. And I think it's because we also have this, I guess, natural emphasis and tendency towards teaching. That's like, I often try to think about, it's like, okay, how do I succinctly explain certain concepts, right? To people who might not already understand them. That's something I always put a lot of thought to. And that's definitely the case with story versus plot. But like I said, that's a whole other podcast.
Yeah. Funnily enough, that's actually, I don't know who said this. They have like this list of things that you need to be able to do to show mastery, right? It's like, oh, I feel like you don't actually understand something unless you can do these 3 things. It's like one of them is like, oh, well, I think they all came down to, you have to be able to teach the thing. You don't actually fully understand and grasp something until you can teach it, because it's one thing to know it and be able to do it kind of like intuitively, but once you hit the limit of your intuition, you have to be able to break it down intellectually. In order to do that, or once you have done that, you can then teach it, and once you can teach it, that displays mastery. Mastery and understanding is being able to teach another person how to do that thing.
Right. Yeah. And it's also, not just at like the mechanical level too, right? Because it's like, well, I guess that's rote learning. If you could do that, that doesn't necessarily display anything. But it's being able to break something down to its component parts
and really understand the fundamentals and the mechanisms by which it works.
Yeah. But anyway, my takeaway here is that I love David Lynch and I want to see more of his movies, because even though I'm very fascinated by him, and I've been on this whole kick of I've been just like consuming lots of David Lynch materials because I'm just fascinated by his character and the way he does interviews and stuff, and the way he talks about the art and the craft. I still haven't seen a lot of his movies, and which is a darn shame because apparently they are, from what I hear, they very much appeal to us, but we just haven't.
Like it's right up our alley.
Yeah, they sound like they're right up our alley, but we just haven't happened to see a lot of them. I think the only David Lynch movie I've seen is Elephant Man. That might be the only one. I can't think of any other. I haven't seen the original Dune. I haven't seen. Which
obviously haven't seen Eraserhead.
Yeah, they haven't seen Eraserhead yet. Yeah, but that's definitely on the list. That's what kind of put him on the map.
Yeah. Which,
to be fair, apparently Dune is the only movie he really regrets. So maybe I don't need to see that one. I remember hearing him say that once in conversation. He was saying, he's proud of all of his films except Dune.
Is that just because it was like a very studio film, or
probably
just like something to do with like the?
I think that was the most commercial film he did, hands down.
Yeah, for sure.
Judging by the fact and the reasoning behind which he turned down the opportunity to direct Return of the Jedi, I think he probably just wasn't built for commercial films.
Yeah, for commercial films.
Look at the movies he makes. You could tell that's not where his passion is at. And I think Dune was probably the most commercial film he worked on. So that was probably just a job.
Yeah, yeah.
But David Lynch, fascinating guy. It's also fascinating to hear him talking about. He talks a lot about what's that thing? Transcendental meditation.
Transcendental meditation.
Yeah, transcendental meditation. He talks a whole hoot about that, but it's very interesting. He that's a subject I don't know too much about, but he seems to know a lot about, and he talks about it actually very academically. Like he could cite research and studies in academia and whatnot, and specific scholars of it. And I mean, from what I understand, that's a very like Eastern concept. And hearing the way, at least it's described, I think it does draw.
Yeah, traditionally it has been,
on a lot of, kind of Eastern, or even like kind of, I don't know, do you know more about that than I do?
I know a lot about meditation in general. Transcendental meditation is a aspect of it that I'm not sure if I understand as academically as generic meditation. I don't know what the difference would be. That as a thing, right? Because it's like, I have an understanding of meditation, and there is a lot of academia and like studies about it, and like that's some of that stuff that I know. But even still, all of my knowledge of that is probably outdated. But transcendental meditation is one of the ones that I'm not sure if I know exactly what that one is, because I know what those words mean,
Right.
but I don't know if there is like a practice that makes that specific type of meditation different from the others.
Yeah, I think there is. Well, because like the way Lynch kind of describes it, it's like first off, he swears by this stuff, and I know I've since heard that there is a subculture of people who do. And a lot of people have. I mean, I think with a lot of subsets of meditation, a lot of people have found a lot of solace in that, in a sort of like pseudo religious kind of way. Or even just like actually religious kind of way, I think.
Yeah.
But you know, the
I would say, well, because in order for you to get the benefit out of meditation, it has to be you have to come at it from even if you're not religious spiritually, religious
like metaphysically, like there has to be a metaphysical component.
Yeah, but also like the practice of it. Like even if you don't believe in the spiritual metaphysical aspect of it, you have to practice it as a religion, as something that is consistent and that kind of, you know what I mean, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah, you have to practice it religiously. It needs to be
exactly. That's what you have to practice it religiously to get any benefit out of it. It's not something you can just do on the weekends once a month.
Tell that to the hipsters.
Oh gosh, man, freaking yoga moms. Oh, that's just like, I love every time someone's just like, oh yeah, like I do yoga. It's like I have a practice that I go to. And it's like, oh yeah, like how often do you practice? It's like, I go like every Friday. It's like,
yeah. Well, they'll say the same thing about meditation too. Those same people will be like, oh yeah, you gotta center your chi, and then yeah. So, but
it's like, no, fool, I'm meditating right now.
But yeah, I guess the way Lynch kind of breaks it down is it sounds. From what I understand, it's like this idea of getting in touch, and maybe this is just a component of meditation more largely, getting in touch with the kind of transcendent undercurrent that kind of goes under all reality. And that there is like a fundamental frequency, so to speak, right? That reality actually is. And then it's just about connecting yourself with that. But I think that's kind of fascinating because for me, within my worldview, I'm like, there's actually kind of a place for that. Like maybe, I mean, perhaps this is just something of a universal concept that appears in a lot of different worldviews, is the understanding that there is a transcendent reality that is the undercurrent of the reality that we can visibly see. And there are moments or sometimes spaces or sometimes times where you can access that and experience something transcendent that cannot otherwise be described.
Yeah. Well, every single religion, regardless of belief, regardless of tradition, regardless of how many deities that they believe in, every single religion has meditation built into it. Every single one, without fail.
Even some weird cults?
Even some weird cults. Some of them are just all meditation. But yeah, every single religion by like necessity has meditation built in, because that is how you access whatever the thing that you're trying to worship. Like that is how you access it. It's through meditation.
You're saying that's how
they call it different things.
Right. I guess so.
They call it different things.
So what you're getting at is that like meditation is the mechanism by which humans interface with like the religious impetus that we have.
Yeah. And it's just that as our culture evolves, we now have spiritual beliefs that have removed all of the religious tradition, and you said, okay, without all of the predisposed like baggage of cultures that came before us, what is it that we want to? What do we have to do to get to that same place without any of that? Without any of that stuff that came before, what do we do to get to that same spot? And then a lot of meditation practices started becoming more mainstream, a lot more westernized, and you have like all these like pseudo religious beliefs and like very spiritual kind of metaphysical hippie stuff. And it's all the same thing. The only difference is the language that they use, and the traditions have switched from being traditions steeped in thousands of years of culture to more academic, like breakdowns of the meditation and the tradition.
Right. Well, I mean, can I do the thing that I do and get theological here for a second and
Go for it,
and kind of explain how that works from the Christian worldview of this idea of like what transcendental meditation might have a parallel with there, because the Bible Project, I think, actually recently did a great video about this concept of eternal life, right? You'll hear that as like a very Christianese thing to say. And it was something that Jesus said a lot, this phrase, eternal life. But the phrase that's actually translating, that's not a very literal translation. A more literal translation of the words that Jesus used in the Greek would be life unto the age. And the problem is that doesn't really mean anything in English. That's like, what is that? Life unto the age, life unto the age. But this actually connects to a much earlier Jewish idea, right? Which of course that's what he's drawing on is the classic Jewish understanding of cosmology, which, and it's this concept that was prevalent in Judaism originally and still prevalent in the Christian tradition, is this idea of there being something, this sort of undercurrent, as I described before, that underpins all of reality and that we can catch glimpses of, but never fully experience on, this side of eternity. But you could catch glimpses of it. And there's this understanding, Dr. Tim Mackey points this out as well. There's this understanding in classic Jewish and Christian philosophy that this isn't a thing that is actually exclusively accessible by believers. Anybody can experience it. Again, there are moments in time where, whether by yourself or in a communal setting, where you experience something transcendent, right? You experience something that is beyond your reality that you can't explain per se, but you know it in your heart that you experience something that is
true.
Fundamentally, true. There's really no better word for it. And, you could have this in a variety of ways. You could have this, when you're interacting with a piece of art that really moves you, or having an experience, again, with in a collective setting, right? Where you're in a crowd of people and yet you could tell that everybody in that moment is experiencing the same thing, right? Mm-hmm. Maybe at a concert or at a rally or something like that, right? You know these moments, or maybe even just interpersonal, right? A moment you shared with another human being or with a person that you love, or things like that, right? Just these moments in time, these finite spaces where you get a glimpse of something that's just like beyond yourself, right? This has always been understood to be something that not only believers can access. Everybody knows what these things are. We've all experienced them. But the idea is that is life. That is what's being referred to as like life unto the age. And basically what we get access to through Jesus is a constant stream of that. And in the Jewish tradition, for example, you have like physical spaces that are designed to curate that life, right? So you have like temples or tabernacles or things like that. And I guess, there are some parallels, but the idea in our New Testament rendition of having not the spaces be sacred, but the people, right? So now all of a sudden the church isn't a place, the temple isn't a place, but the temple, our bodies are the temple, the church are the people, and now all of a sudden it's within the people rather than in a place where that experience is cultivated. And so that's kind of, when I hear the way transcendental meditation is explained, that kind of is where my mind goes in the Christian sense. I think, and that's why I kind of look at stuff like that and be like, I think there is something to that, because like I said, there's still this understanding that life, that what we as Christians in biblical theology refer to as life, right, and life unto the age, is something that can be witnessed and understood and experienced by people who are not believers. It could be understood by anybody because it's true. There is something there, and we have different ways of trying to explain it, but that's the way we understand it.
Yeah. There's always going to be a superficial aspect to life. And of course, I'm sure everybody has come across people who only interact with that superficial aspect. And it's extremely obvious, right? But it's less obvious when somebody has a deeper connection. But all meditation does, and all the different practices of meditation, all it does is it just looks under that superficial aspect and tries to get into that deeper, more connected reality. And lots of different traditions have various methods of getting to that point.
Yeah. That's the fascinating thing. This got into a really philosophical podcast, but we should probably talk about something less weighty.
Yeah, something a little less weighty.
I don't know. What do we got?
I was gonna say, do you want to get into? You want to go right into a Did You Know segment? I could talk about analog versus digital.
Oh, sure. Yeah, let's go with that.
Yeah, let's go straight from philosophical to computer science.
Oh, did you know?
All right, Raph.
Yeah.
Do you know what digital means?
Okay, so now you're challenging me.
That's not a trick question.
Okay. Because, well, I mean, I was in a digital media theory class for my brief stint in college, so it's like I should know the answer to this.
Although digital media, slightly different interpretation. It's a couple of different. It's a couple
Okay.
iterations removed from the word digital, but just the word digital. What does that mean?
Well, so digital, I think of as being how should I say, a electronic medium that is it's more related to computing rather than mechanical engineering.
Mm-hmm.
Am I anywhere in the ballpark here?
Okay, so something electric.
I guess that's where my mind kind of goes. But I know a lot of analog stuff. It relies on electricity, but it's not in that same computing level of processing, right? Where you have complex formulations going on with, say, microprocessors and stuff like that.
So digital comes from digit, meaning finger, and I think what it means is count, so numbers. So digital just means it uses numbers.
Right.
And in digital computing, ones and zeros, two of them, two numbers.
Yep, binary.
So you can count anything that is digital basically just means you can count the amount of states that it is in, right? And so far we have two. We're going to have supercomputers, quantum computers coming up soon where we're going to have four states.
Oh my goodness. Have you heard about all this quantum stuff that's happening?
I have heard a little bit, but let's talk about two for now.
Okay. I was going to say, maybe, quantum.
We don't have to get into superpositions yet.
Quantum computing is going to be a different podcast. Okay.
That's a whole different podcast. Yeah, for sure.
I know. Yeah. The world is changing.
Yes. And also it's kind of what I'm coming to with this as well, is the world it's not changing. It's actually reverting, because digital computing is what we've been doing for however many years since the computer. Transistors are just basically little tiny electronic switches. They used to be massive, but nowadays they're like the size of an atom, of just a switch that that go from on and off, and you have millions and billions of those on and off signals to create the language that we use to compute basically all of our digital media and all of our internet and all of that stuff. It's all data that is held in series of ones and zeros, digits. Analog does not have digits, which means if a digit is a quantifiable state of a system, if one does not have that, what does that mean, right? If it doesn't have a single or a countable quantifiable state, that means the state that it exists in is fluid. And that's what analog technology is. Analog technology is any technology that measures data without using defined states, without using defined steps. It's fluid. So an electrical signal, a sine wave, is fluid. You get that AC signal from the wall, and it goes up and down in that sine wave. That is not a digital signal. That is a fluid analog signal, right? So anything that is analog is anything that doesn't have any of those states. A lot of things can be analog. So you can have a mechanical computer that runs on a crank, and with what do you call that? Gears, with gears interlocking and creating states of this thing to exist in, and you have a clock. You have an analog clock, and that is a form of computing data that is not digital, compared to a digital clock, which just has a tiny computer in it. So analog has a lot of different applications. You can still run electricity through it, or it can be completely mechanical. And there's a lot of stuff that we can do with digital, given enough transistors, right? But there's a lot of stuff that analog just works best at. Like I said, like a clock. A clock is really a combination of analog and digital anyways, because a lot of the times, like even a lot of like these pseudo digital clocks, they require something to be constantly running at like a set time, and they'll use like these little tiny crystals that vibrate at a certain frequency and just run electricity through it. They'll vibrate, and then you use that as a method of computing time. That's an analog signal.
Wait, is that how it works?
So there's that is like the in-between step between like the actual like grandfather mechanical gears clock, or like your tiny little like your Swiss clock or whatever, and then like a clock with a battery. That's like the thing in between. Okay, just getting into clocks alone, that's a whole thing. Timekeeping.
Yeah, I was gonna say
timekeeping throughout history has been fascinating, because how do we even tell time? That is a question that you would think in this day is like, oh yeah, that's easy. But how did we get here? How did we get to this point, right? Accurate keeping of time has been, throughout history, has been fascinating. That might be a whole different Did You Know section. However,
that's true, because now I'm fascinated. I want to know. Going
back to analog, so anything that requires a steady signal, we are actually using. I say we, like, we're all of humanity, but there are different parts of computer science, that is actually reverting from digital back to analog, because there is some stuff that analog is just better at computing.
Really?
And we are going back and making analog computers using sine wave function stuff. I don't know the exact science of it, because that is a whole field beyond me. However, what is important is that this is the stuff that we used to do before computers. This is how we measured the world in, because before computers, nothing was digital. Everything was analog. Right. But now we have the technology of post-digital technology. That was a whole explosion of electronics. We are going back, and now we are replicating old methods of measurements or of analyzing data, and using old methods with current technology. One of the things that is super fascinating is AI training.
Analog AI training?
Because what is one of the methods of AI training that is constantly touted as like, this is like the most powerful way of training AIs or whatever. I don't know what the people say. People make all sorts of claims. But what is one of the ways that we try to train AIs?
Well, you're talking about like this black box stuff where you just feed them a bunch of references?
You feed it a bunch of references, but what is that technique called?
That's called machine learning.
Machine learning, but it's a specific kind of machine learning. There's a lot of different kinds of machine learning.
Oh no, what's the more specific term than that?
Because I know you know what it is.
That's
you just might not get there.
No, I stopped at machine learning.
Stopped at machine learning. So machine learning is a whole family of different learning techniques. Neural networking, right?
Right, neural networking.
Yeah, I know you knew what it was, but neural networking.
My brain.
What that's supposed to do is kind of teach a computer the way our brains learn stuff, right? You have a bunch of nodes, and then each node is given a weight, and and you feed it a ton of references, and then all of those nodes will kind of fall into place, and then the AI will, make decisions based on the weight of all those nodes. All those nodes are digital. Those are a defined state of the computer, right? Yes, digital. It's still digital.
Right.
However, it does a really good job.
And it does, I was going to say, it does a decent job of the way we're currently doing neural networking. I still can't get over that AI that you showed me that learned to box.
Yeah, it's crazy. The problem is it's very slow, because it has to compute tons of numbers and all this other stuff.
It takes an excessive amount of iterations as it is now.
And it's like the amount of nodes and time that it would take to teach a computer using neural networking is immense. And what we're trying to do is imitate an analog process. So what if we just made an analog? What if instead of using weights and numbers that equate to strengths of like voltage going through a brain, right? Because like our brain is just like basically we call it wetware as opposed to hardware. It's wetware. It's like our brain is a giant computer. There's electrical signals that are passing through, and that is how we create consciousness or whatever is going on in our brain. There's no digital signals going on there. It's just like electricity passing through. So we're going backwards to go forwards and say, remove all the digital stuff, get rid of the weights and the numbers and the computing, and we're just going to use a straight signal that will go through. I don't know how they make these computers, but a transistor equivalent.
Yeah, I was going to say that must be like way different than what we have, say, in our rooms.
Yeah, a transistor.
It's fundamentally different machine.
A transistor equivalent, where instead of it being 1 and 0, it's 0 to 1 with an infinite number of stuff in between. So it's 0 is just there's no signal. 1 is a signal is all the way on. But the signal doesn't have to be all the way on or all the way off, because electricity can have different impedances and whatever, and it can be like 0.0357 infinite repeating. And as this signal passes through from one end of this block of machines to the other, the input will change, or the input changes, the output changes, whatever's going on in the middle. We can train computers to learn using an analog signal as opposed to a digital signal. And apparently, for this specific application, because it's exactly what we're trying to do, the digital version is just imitating analog. This is analog. This is supposedly really, really fast.
Really? Okay, but here's the thing. Like, sure, you could train an AI super fast that way if analog is just a more streamlined and efficient process for running these iterations.
Yeah.
But I mean, is that transferable though? Like, because the world runs on digital interfaces right now. Can you get that AI back into a digital function once you've trained it in order to be of use?
So that is one of the things that they're currently trying to figure out the most efficient way of integrating. Yeah, right. Of integrating this technology.
Right.
Because everything works in digital right now. It basically goes from an analog signal, you train it through that, and then you create your black box, which sometimes is a physical box in this case, because it's like electrical signals going through it. Black box system that is trained for a specific task. Getting it to do that in digital, you have to translate all those stuff, move it back into a digital format, and then upload it, and then it'll do its thing. So there's this one particular, I think, company or team that I'm referencing when I'm talking about this specific iteration.
That's what I was wondering. I was wondering if you have specific examples here, because right now, so far, we've only talked about theory.
In the abstract.
You haven't told me anything concrete of any of this going on.
Yes. So there is this one particular team that I'm referencing, and what they're working on is basically creating the interface between that analog signal and the digital computer, and making it so that they're building a whole system that you'll feed in an input and it will spit out a digital output, having first gone through the analog iterations.
Okay. Do you have a name?
Mythic AI is who I am referencing with this. Can I just read you really quick? Just mythic.ai, one of the first things that you see dropping in on their page.
Sure.
AI's immense potential is being constrained. Innovation is hampered.
Hampered?
Oh
no.
Today's digital AI processors are tremendously expensive to develop and rely on traditional computer architectures, limiting innovation to only the largest technology companies. Analog computing is ideal for edge AI. So these guys they're experimenting with making a full, complete system for developing AI and training them using analog techniques. And then eventually we're going to have to convert it back into digital so that we can, use them on a computer. But even still, even if they didn't have to, even if they developed their own proprietary system that worked entirely analog, I don't know how that would work, if that would catch on. Can you imagine a Mass Effect style VI sometime in the future that's just it's just the box and a projector, and it's you just plug it in and it goes.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Well, I was gonna say though too, if you've been watching the Corridor Crew's latest ventures into AI technology, especially obviously they do a lot of stuff, especially as it regards to production. Obviously they started with deep fakes and using that as a visual effect technique, but then also moving into a whole bunch of areas as well. But that AI technology in general that's been trained that way is getting a lot more accessible thanks to a lot of entrepreneurial people. But Yeah, it's not just a big tech thing anymore. There's certainly a lot of little programs you can get that are developed the same way that have been that are pretty accessible now. But yeah, I guess it's still the point though that not too many people have the capability to train those things to begin with. You're just using someone else's program at that point. You know, I have a friend who also like started using, I guess I forget the name of it, but he recommended this AI based.
Oh, the one that
I think it's a rotoscoping software. The Corridor Crew used one in one of their videos, but I think there's since been better ones that are like pretty accessible. Some even free, I think, that can do, or at least with a small subscription cost or something like that, that do rotoscoping really, really well.
Yeah.
And it's kind of insane to see because it used to be that rotoscoping was the big tedious part of visual effects. And if we could just automate that, that would be just mind-blowing, the amount of efficiency that VFX artists can get, and as a result, you know, filmmakers in general who are doing VFX heavy pieces. And that's kind of like what you were saying, because I know there's a lot of, it's the nature of our culture that there's a lot of skepticism and even fear that runs around the subject of artificial intelligence. I think, as with most things, I think a lot of it kind of goes back to a general ignorance of the way a lot of these things work. But because this is very emerging technology, and so not a lot of people grew up with the vocabulary necessary to parse these kinds of subjects.
That is also true.
Yeah, like it's very even in our generation, it's very limited, right? The number of people who would really have a mind for this sort of thing. But there is a lot of skepticism. There's a lot of fear about that stuff. But it's hard to emphasize how great the limitations of these kind of things are, right? Like general intelligence just isn't even a possibility, right? It's just mathematically it's not there. But
not with the current technology. Something very vastly different from what we have now would have to be invented first.
Sure. But I guess I would have it on a theological assumption, let's say, that it probably won't ever come up. But
that's the thing. Like when I say something like vastly different, I mean like metaphysically vastly different.
That is true. You mean fundamentally different. Physically. Yeah. So, but that's the thing is, well, the way you've always explained it to me, and I think this is something that I hope more people can come to understand, in terms of, and there are scary things that can be done. That's just the nature of things. But that's been the case for a long time, right? That there are scary things that you're able to do with technology. That's been the case for a long, long time, even with VFX technology. So, you know, things like deepfakes they're not necessarily what the end result that people fear them being used for isn't something that is new. That's been doable for a long time. The only thing that's changing is how easy it is, right? So it's not basically what we're seeing is the thing that has always been the case, which is this forward momentum, right? I guess it gets back to the Moore's law thing. Is that the one with the size of the processors or transistors or whatever? That
you could fit twice the amount of transistors per square area or per square whatever. That doubles.
Yeah, unit of measurement.
It doubles every 2 years, something like that.
Yeah, something like that. And if I understand, that stayed roughly on point. That law has held up. And it's just really what we're seeing is the continuation of the pattern that we've always seen, which is that the technologies that we've had are just getting more and more efficient, right? And as they get more and more efficient, they get more and more accessible. And so the main thing that's changing is who has access to that. And I suppose, there is a scare in that, but it's not. I don't think it's quite as existential as it's made out to be oftentimes, right? Because essentially what you're worried about is the human condition.
You're worried about bad people doing bad things. And it's like,
having
better technology isn't going to make that any different.
Yeah, exactly, right? Like the human condition has always been the human condition. There's nothing new under the sun. See, I have that one on theological assumption for sure. You know, right? Like we didn't need new technologies to have immoral people.
Yeah, of course.
So, or even, or even moral people taking immoral action.
Yeah.
So that's not necessarily a new thing. It's just a different thing. But I don't know, maybe I'm a bit desensitized to change just by virtue of the amount of stuff that has changed within my lifetime.
It's a case of the devil you know, right? People will accept the devil they know versus the one that they don't. And it's like, okay, this new technology is being invented and all this new stuff is happening. And they're like, whoa, hold up. This is going to mess me up in a completely new and different way, and I'm not ready for it.
That's fair. That's fair. So it's like, I understand a lot of that fear-based response, but I think, especially through my conversations with you, because you keep your finger a bit more on the pulse of this stuff than I do, it's really kind of calming just to see the amusing ways in which it's been used already. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, just watching that AI learn how to box was just that was a wholesome little video. I was like, wow, look at you go. And you're already doing pretty good. He's already bobbing and weaving. But it's, stuff like that, right? Like, when you actually see the iterative progress that's being made, it's just kind of, well, at a certain level, it's just kind of fun. But it's kind of a reminder that it's less of it's not as scary of a thing. Yeah. And it may lead to scary things, but that is true of all things in all places at all times.
It's like the technology that is used to, build houses, shelter, security for most people. You ever heard of somebody getting stabbed? It's the exact same thing. It's a saw. Right. It's a sharp blade. Like the stuff that is used to, cut down and process lumber to create housing, which is shelter, is also used to empty somebody's bowels of, their blood and intestines. Like, it's the same thing. Technology has nothing to do with how it's used. That's a person thing. That is how people decide to use those technologies. Sharp stuff has been around for many, many, many thousands of years. And we just kind of, we kind of live with it now because that's just, we accept that that's a thing that's in our life. It's the same thing that's going to happen with what we have now. It's the exact same thing. We're just going to accept that, like, oh yeah, like, having vastly superior AI when it comes to mathematics and processing data to, what a human can do, simply just because it's a massive supercomputer. Like, there's just more space in that brain than is in ours. That's just going to become a normal thing in 10, 20, 50 years. It's not, the fears that we have now are going to be forgotten in 3 generations.
Right. Well, and I think that's the nature, and maybe it helps to have a wide engagement with science fiction too, especially speculative science fiction or more like future-based world-building science fiction, is you kind of have this broader idea of how culture can change, or at least this vision of it, right? Where you've seen speculation of just like, okay, in the future, what might things be like, right? We can guess at that right now, and we won't know until we get there. But even looking at my life right now and just the way we live on a daily basis with the kind of technologies we have, would have been certain elements of it would have been completely unfathomable, or at least only imaginable to our younger selves. And so I could see within my own lifetime how much culture can change based on new innovations. And that's just the thing, right? It's just culture just changes and adapts, and things change, right? You look at like a cyberpunk dystopia, the characters in that world aren't necessarily looking at all that stuff like, wow, this is weird and dark, right? That's us as an audience member having that experience. The characters in that world are sitting there going like, this is my life. This has been my life. It will continue to be my life, which isn't necessarily to render judgment on it one way or another. But the thing is, again, it's just, you will see the human condition pop up either way. And it's just a matter of what form it takes, but essentially what skin it wears. And it's just a different culture, right? Just culture is going to change. And I guess that's the thing that it ultimately comes down to, is fear of the unknown, and specifically fear of change. Yeah,
fear of change is probably, I think, I would go on record to say fear of change is the largest that a living creature can experience. And every other fear is just the fear of change in a different, you're saying it's in a different skin, right? A lot of people are afraid of things that hurt, or being in dangerous situations. What you're afraid of is that the condition that you are in now, alive, might change.
Well, kind of like we were saying earlier, how some people say there's only one kind of story. I would actually argue that, that there is only one fear, which is the fear of the unknown. And I think fear of change is the greatest manifestation of the fear of the unknown.
Yeah.
Because change is inherently moving from a state of known to a state of unknown. You know what I mean? And especially, and I think that's why culture wars get so heated, is because the biggest change you could experience almost is a cultural change. You know, I would argue that's one of the biggest changes you could experience. But I think the thing that makes it doubly scary and makes culture wars doubly heated is the fact that cultural change is one of the biggest changes you could experience, and you will have to continue to live with it. You know,
it's a permanent change. It's not a temporary change.
Exactly.
It's a change that once it's there, it can never change back. It can only change again to something else.
Right. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I say that, but
yeah, that's true. We do have some regression, but I mean, you know, but that's not to speak too harshly though. Like, I think all this to say is it's a very understandable fear because it's a very base fear, right? Like, I wouldn't necessarily judge anyone for that, but I think it's helpful to recognize it so that you could kind of address it where it starts to negatively impact your life.
Fear is a survival technique. It is good for us to fear things. People without fear die very quickly, right? It's like
right, kind of like people without pain.
There's a lot of people who don't fear things in an unhealthy way. Fear is healthy in many situations. It's how we gauge risk, right? It's how we interact with our environment and, you know, continue on to be able to create the next generation. Fear is good most of the time. Once it becomes unhealthy, just like anything else, once it starts negatively affecting your life, once it starts becoming something that is constantly on your mind and is constantly causing worry and distress, that's when fear becomes negative. Just like with anything can become negative. Even the most positive thing, we talked about this earlier, there's always
moderation,
a good thing, right?
Right. Oh, hey, the Hypercube drinking game.
Yeah, call back to a previous episode.
The moderation again. That's another one on the bingo card.
Even fear has its place. Even fear is healthy in the right amounts. But you just have to understand that you don't have to be fearful all the time.
Yeah. Well, this got into an interesting tangent. I didn't expect analog versus digital to go, but I guess that's an emergent conversation that comes from that. And I think it also touches on...
Once you bring in AI, it's like, oh, well, now time to talk about cultural fear.
Yeah, time to talk about the elephant in the room that probably part of our audience is thinking of when we talk about stuff like that.
That's, you know... Okay, I have a hard time imagining other people's existence.
This is true. You do have a hard time doing that.
I'm over here just like, this is fantastic news. This is fantastic news. Like, AI is going to learn much faster.
Yeah. You forget that you're probably scaring some people when you say that.
Yeah.
So which is why I think it's helpful to also address that side of the conversation when we talk about this kind of stuff. That being said, it's very fascinating, and I honestly look forward to the ways in which it is already improving my workflow. Well, actually, that's not true. I don't do as much of the VFX stuff. That's really where the biggest improvements that AI is making for our pipeline is. So please, Loryn, get some AI rotoscopers and tell me when you use them.
I will.
and I will watch as you render.
You know what? You know that meme of just like, here's what people think digital art looks like, and it's just press a button. We're getting to that very quickly.
But again, that's where, and let me double back though to what I was saying earlier, which is that's a thing that you've always assured me of, is that you've always had this approach to automation in general of what its purpose is and what its function is in our lives. And you've always had this optimistic idea that I actually find rather comforting, which is this idea that what automation, the things that can be automated should be automated. Because I
have a very strong belief.
Yeah, because the things that can be automated are essentially the busy work that's only going to take your time, right? Using the example that I keep referring to here, rotoscoping, right? That's a time-consuming visual effect practice. Eliminating that is only beneficial because rotoscoping is just something you need to get out of the way. If you could eliminate the time that you need to complete that step, then you'll have more room to make your creative decisions in your visual effects rather than focusing on your technical decisions. Because technical decisions are just limitations. They're just steps that you have to get out of the way in order to achieve your creative decisions. The creative decisions are what matter.
Yeah, in order to do the real art.
Yeah. Yeah. And so that's what a lot of automation frees us up for, is getting rid of the busy work so that we could focus on the work that actually matters, which is often, in our field at least, creative decisions, but it's true in a lot of other fields, that there are better decisions that can be more freely made once you have certain busy work kind of streamlined in your process.
Yeah. Because I even take it a step further when talking about automation, because I will go on record to say any work can be automated, should be automated. And by extension of that, anything that a computer can do, a human should not do. If a robot can do it, it's not a human's job. A human is not a computer. A human is a creative being with life experience, right? We have all this stuff that makes us, pretty good at interacting with our world and drawing from memory and learning new stuff. A computer does one thing, and it does one thing really well: math. We don't need to do that. That is not our job. Our job is not to do tedious, meaningless, boring, soulless work. That is the job of the computer. That is what they are for. Automating that, if it can be automated, a human should not be doing it, because it's inherently soulless, and we have better stuff to do with our time.
Well, which is interesting too, because you also dignify, I think your formulation of it, at least in the conversations we've had off recording, and I just want to formalize it here just to add some clarity to what you're saying, is your view of it also dignifies the meaningless, tedious work if that's what somebody wills to do. Right? Like if that's what, like you were saying, like mathematics, for example, like if someone is passionate about mathematics and wants to spend a lot of their time doing, solving all sorts of mathematical problems, then that is something that they can do, even if a computer would be capable of doing it better. Right. Or for example, I think a better example to look to would be, because like John Green reminded me of this in some of his recent videos of he's been getting into gardening, certain kinds of things, right? And technically, it's very inefficient to do it yourself.
Yes.
He was pointing out, like, it costed him more to plant, work, cultivate, and harvest those beans than it would have cost to get the same amount from the store. But that's not why he's doing it, right?
Exactly.
The process is the effect of doing the process and having that be your life and having something that you put your sweat into.
Yeah, well, it comes down to intention, right? Because again, I'm basically talking about production, right? Production, like getting work done. If your intention is to complete a project, then the meaningless stuff, you should not be doing that. That is not where you should be devoting your time. But if that is not your intention, if your intention is to have an experience, it literally doesn't matter what you do. Everything is an experience. Everything is valuable, as long as you're doing it with intention, as long as you know that what you're going to be doing is for your benefit only.
Yeah, exactly.
Again, I'm only talking from a project completion point of view.
Right, a productivity standpoint, essentially. Yeah,
productivity point of view.
Yeah. Essentially, what you're vouching for is like a very Star Trek future. I guess is what your idea is. People should only have to do the work that they love doing.
If you love doing something, there shouldn't be anything in the way of you doing it. That's just, I would think that was obvious.
But yeah, that seems like a good note to end on. This kind of took a turn, and I think we kind of had small micro expressions of larger conversations that we'll have to have at another time too, because this last subject kind of touched on a lot of touchstones that we often converse about, everything from like tools versus weapons to just general ideas of innovation and progress and
the nature of fear
and the nature of resources as well. I think there's a lot of conversations that emerge from the idea of how we as a civilization manage limited resources. And I think that's basically what a lot of conversation about productivity ultimately boils down to. But anyway, all that is for another time.
Yeah.
That's just the way our brains work. But thank you all very much for listening. This has been the Hypercube podcast. This show is edited by Loryn Pacheco, mixed by Raphael Pacheco, with theme music by Mono Memory. Until next time, we'll see y'all later. God bless.
Hope you have a good week.